understanding is that carrot consumption has actually gone up in the United States as a result of the availability of this. And so each time this occurred, certain processes like a phase gate process or how to implement design thinking, which is very much a process too. And those are good things. And up until, I'm going to say maybe 8 or so years ago, their typical business model was that it had 2 ways of working.
Hello, everyone. I welcome you in another exciting episode of the Business Narrative, where you are interacting with multiple entrepreneurs, real life heroes. So, do subscribe the channel and press the bell icon. And today we have another special guest, and he has been working with mature industries from last many years, and he is a writer, innovator, and with that, he is a magician. We will be going to discuss a lot of things with Bruce. Bruce, thank you so much for your precious time today.
Oh, thanks to you. I appreciate it, the opportunity to be with you today.
Bruce, as we know, that innovation is an outcome of habits, not of random acts, right? So, do let me know, what is innovation? Innovation can be taught in universities or it can be learned by some practices. If yes, then what are some practices that a student can practice them and he can be an innovator in this modern era?
Oh, thanks for asking. It's a really good question. I can come at this a couple of different ways. There are different ways that people understand and, if you will, frame innovation. And a lot of times in companies, they frame it as a process. A lot of executives frame it in terms of how they organize a business. Universities frame it in, as you had said, teaching certain skills and certain activities. And a number of those things can be good. So I don't want to disparage those or set them all aside. But what I've seen across many decades and countless companies and countless people that I've worked with is that at the end of the day, innovation is very much a human and personal activity. And so that's the first point I'll make. And then you asked about nature versus nurture. And I'll say that the answer is yes, that it's a little bit of both. And that by that, I mean that there are people that have very much what I would say natural or innate skills. They see patterns. They see things that other people don't see. And that I'd say is that innate skill is difficult, if not perhaps impossible to teach, but it can be developed over time. And so what you learn at a university might be how to do a market study, how to do market research, which is a good thing. You might learn certain processes like a phase gate process or how to implement design thinking, which is very much a process too. And those are good things. But at the end of the day, those processes and those tools are only as good as the people that do the work. And so, really what I've advocated for is finding the people, identifying the people who have some proclivity or inclination or inherent skill, and then allowing them to develop over time. And then the last piece I'll mention is that these people are very self-motivated, the ones who succeed. And they're self-motivated to solve customer problems. And one of the things that I've seen is that a lot of people who study innovation or aspire to be entrepreneurs, they do it because they want to be seen or known as an innovator or an entrepreneur. And the best people aspire to do the work that innovators do. And that's different. It's not necessarily aspiring to be an innovator, but aspiring to do the work that innovators do. And it's that distinction that really, I think, helps people determine who ultimately will be the most successful in these kinds of situations.
Okay, I'll totally agree with that. But I have driven another question. We have seen that there is an old conflict between innovators and entrepreneurs. And many people think that innovators, they always struggle to become CEOs. This is a reality or it's just a myth?
Well, I guess the question is cannot. I think that a lot of it depends on the environment that they're in. So, for example, an entrepreneur is in mostly a small startup type of activity, and they can, many times, not always, emerge and grow into being a CEO. An innovator within a mature organization, they typically have a different skill set, and for the most part, they don't necessarily aspire to be the CEO. And so there are different inclinations that you see in these people. And the other thing I'll say too is that they have different funding mechanisms. And I don't think we necessarily spoke about this earlier, but I want to call that out, that an entrepreneur looks to typically external funding or self-funding to make things happen. Whereas in a business, they're mostly looking for funding from executive level people, and it's a different approach. So the entrepreneur might be risking their livelihood, risking their job, risking their investment, mortgaging their house. The innovator in an existing company won't be doing things like that.
It's very difficult to see innovation in these days. So, according to you, inventing new things was harder in past, let's say, 100 years ago, or innovation is harder in today's era? Because, like in recent past, we haven't seen a very dynamic innovation in any businesses, right? So, like, what is your take on it? So, what are some key steps which can help people to create innovation in this modern era?
I don't think it's significantly different. And by that I mean everybody, every era, every time in which people live, there are things that are known and not known, and there's always some potential opportunity that's out there beyond where you're at. And so I don't know if we necessarily spoke about this when we had the call earlier, but you can go back hundreds of years. Albrecht Dürer was an artist from 1500 roughly, and he innovated the way woodblock printing was done, and he was able to do things that other people didn't do back then. And he both was artistically skilled, he had that creativity, but he also had keen business sense and how he structured his business model. And so that was a time when, I mean, clearly there was, the big technology then was the printing press, if you will. And so, you can look at every era and say that we're just, if you will, kind of riding the wave that we're in, the wave that we're situated in. I was sharing with someone just earlier today, and even last night in a different call, about how 50 years ago, when the first handheld calculators came out, it really disrupted things. It disrupted a 400-year technology, the slide rule. And that was really a big transition. Today we look back at that and we can kind of smile at that and say, oh, isn't that nice? Isn't that quaint? But at the time it was significant. When cell phones went from being just a phone to having cameras and a microprocessor, which again, it almost sounds silly when I hear myself talk about this. That was 25 years ago. And yet today we look at that and we take it for granted. But at the time, it was hard for many people, to even conceive of this. And so where I'm at today is I say, I just wonder what's going to be next. And it may be AI, it may be quantum computing, and quite honestly, it may not. It may be something entirely different. And so it's left for those who are out there, who have a sense and a belief that there's something to be discovered.
Nokia was a big giant in mobile phone industry, and their ex-CEO, he said that we did not do anything wrong, but unfortunately, we lost the battle. Like uh, where they were wrong, didn't have that serial innovator in their company. That's why they lost the battle. Like when companies need serial innovators.
I think having what I would refer to as a serial innovator is a necessity, and that's someone who has a track record, or will soon demonstrate a track record of success in identifying needs and bringing those ideas that they've developed within their organization to secure funding and buy-in to address those customer needs in ways that are really unique and make money for the company, and that change the pattern of competition in an industry. Really, when you change the basis of competition in an industry, that's huge, and that's what who I refer to as serial innovators, they do, whether that's in an entrepreneurial startup or whether it's in a mature organization. And so I believe you need these people. And I will say it goes counter to what a number of people say. A lot of people are opposed, if you will, to this idea of the value of an individual. They focus on teams. And I see the value of teams, but we could go off at some length and even talk about which kinds of teams succeed and which ones fail. And in a nutshell, the teams that are pre-formed more often than not don't succeed. They may come up with some ideas, but they don't truly disrupt an industry. A team that's formed based on someone with great insight who brings people in that are needed to solve the problem, that's where you succeed. And that's, if you will, a vulnerability, because companies that try to preform these teams just don't often have what they need to succeed in these problems.
I have another question. Like you were talking about serial innovator, and what should be the traits of serial innovator? Because in this era, it is very difficult to hire someone, especially those people who claim that they are a serial innovator and they will going to provide innovation in any sort of business. So, like when you are hiring a serial innovator, what should be the parameters? And it is not possible if a serial innovator has given ideas to many businesses. It is not possible every idea will get success, right?
Yeah, you never can guarantee success in these things. In fact, and that shouldn't be shied away from, because all acts of knowing what's going on are an act of belief. It's not an act of fact. It's an act of belief. I believe something to be the case, and then we find out whether it is over time. When we talk about serial innovators the way you framed it, if you're an entrepreneur, I would like to believe that the entrepreneur would be the serial innovator to begin with, that they would be the person who has the kernel of the idea. They've understood a market need. They've come up with a solution to that market need. They maybe reframed that need in some way. They've understood that need in a different way, and they've come up with a solution. And so ideally, an entrepreneur, at least in the early stages, should be that serial innovator. Or if they're partnering with someone, and that partnership can work, a two-person partnership can work. Getting beyond two people, it gets more difficult to communicate. But then now you've added a new wrinkle, and I really appreciate and respect that. What do you do when you've got a startup, and now they're confronted with what do we do with AI? And if it's a technology-intensive startup, meaning it's a startup that really relies heavily on technology, I'd like to believe that entrepreneur can pick that up on their own. They can learn what they need to on their own. If it's a startup where they're making a physical product, and I'll just use this to illustrate this, my colleague Walter Herbst, who co-authored the No Excuses Innovation book, he with his son have a design firm. They designed this box cutter with a colleague at a company called Slice. And they really changed the way box cutters could be conceived. At that time, if AI had come out, I'm not sure how much they would have needed AI. And so it really depends on how intense that technology need is. And in fact, I'll quickly say, when I look at use cases of AI today, it's usually people who have needs that are low risk, where they're just looking for additional ideas, a large number of ideas. And so I think if an entrepreneur knows that's what they need and they're just looking for some ideas, usually those entrepreneurs should be skilled enough to get in, roll up their sleeves and learn what they need to do. And you know, I think I maybe mentioned this to you before. Innovation is the act of discovery. It's a very human and very personal act of discovery. And the question is whether they do it or whether they delegate it to someone. Now, I'll quickly, without hopefully taking too much of your time on this, you asked a wonderful question about how do they know if this other person is good at that? Because the last thing you want to do is engage with a charlatan. And we've all read stories about people who tell a good story but don't necessarily live up to that. And some of that is you look at their track record. You see what they've done over time. You see where they've succeeded. Have they succeeded? If they don't have a track record, you are placing a bet on someone. So you have to be careful, but you find ways to evaluate them. It's a lot like uh, when people look for counterfeit money. They're not trained for what looks bad in a bill, in a dollar bill. They're trained to learn what looks right. And so what you're looking for are people who have this passion for solving customer problems, people who see patterns, and they often see patterns that other people don't see. And they're people who are able to bring others along with them. Those are some of the key characteristics that you look for when you want to gauge people like this.
Bruce, I'm very curious to know what sort of innovation can happen in a stable business, and from your past experiences, can you share any relevant case study for the listeners and for the viewers?
Yeah, let me give you one that um, I just happened to be working with this company when this all happened. And so I was fortunate to, if you will, be what we might call a fly on the wall to watch how this all emerged. I've been on the advisory board of a private equity group out of Chicago, JVA Partners, and I've been on their advisory board for it's well over a decade. I'd have to go back and look how many years. It might be a dozen or more years by now. And and one of their portfolio companies is a company called Westech Automation Solutions, and they solve automation problems for other companies, for manufacturing companies. And up until I'm going to say maybe 8 or so years ago, their typical business model was that it had two ways of working. They were either given a very specific design that they had to build an automation system to that design, or they were given some performance characteristics and then they had to design and build that system. So it was either build to design or build to specification. And that model worked well. And that's really the way the entire industry worked. And in this time frame, and again, I think I'm going to say it was maybe 2018, 2019. I'd have to go back and look at my notes. Westech was approached by a company that was very new into this field of manufacturing, and they were taking a big leap into manufacturing, which is very unusual. So they hadn't had any scale manufacturing before. They were making this big step, and they contacted Westech and a number of other companies, and they brought them in, and they said, "We want the output of this manufacturing facility to create this product at this rate and this quality. You guys figure it out." So now it's not Westech dealing just with their client company. It's Westech dealing with their client company and also other parts, other companies that were building other parts of the manufacturing system. An entirely different way of thinking. And so I would sit in on these meetings and observe and if you will, document and try to look for the patterns of what they were doing. And these guys were naturals at just learning the needs of these customers and learning what the upstream and downstream automation solution providers were doing and fitting in and negotiating this. And as a result, because they performed so well at this, they learned and discovered, because again, my comment earlier that innovation is a very, very personal and human act of discovery. They discovered how to work in this environment. And so Westech's been very successful in building an entirely new line of business based on this ability to work not just with build to this spec or build to this design, but build to this, as you said, a chaotic situation. And they immersed themselves in it and they did it. And it's not easy. Not every company will succeed, but with the right people, and I've said this for years now, Westech has a wonderful team. I not that they're there to entertain me, but I always enjoy interacting with them because they're so willing to just discover these things. And that's a big part of it. A lot of companies aren't willing to do that. A lot of mature companies aren't willing to do that.
Bruce, can you explain that carrot pillar principle and how it disrupting industrial fundamentals? Like you always mention this principle, and I try to understand, but it was very difficult for me to understand this kind of principle. So, as a seasonal innovator, can you explain this?
Yeah, thanks for asking. It's a favorite of mine, and I want to be clear. I just want you to know the context. This story is profiled in this book, No Excuses Innovation, that I co-authored with Walter Herbst, who I had mentioned earlier. Because again, it was Walter and his son who had done this, and that's the box cutter, if you will, on the surface. But you had asked about the carrot peeler story. If you go back over 100 years ago, if someone wanted to peel carrots, so they wanted to peel carrot, they would use a knife, just a straight edge knife, and they would peel, kind of away at their heart's content. And if you're like me, sometimes you would cut too deep, sometimes you would cut too shallow. Every once in a while, you'd cut yourself. And I often demonstrate this in presentations, and I have a couple times, not often, cut myself by accident. So you have to be careful with this. And it was inefficient and slow, but it would produce peeled carrots. And then I'm going to say pretty much about 100 years ago, based on the patent literature, somebody came up with what we now know as the safety peeler. And that's where you see two blades that are pointed towards each other. They're on kind of a swivel and on a very simple handle. And the safety peeler is a marvelous device, and it really changed the basis of competition, because the safety peeler allows you to just scrape away at a carrot. It addresses a lot of the problems I mentioned earlier. It doesn't cut too deep. It doesn't cut too shallow for the most part. You rarely cut yourself. And you can really kind of use this at great, kind of all day if you wanted. It's fascinating because when you see the time that original peeler was developed, that was redefining the basis of competition. It's not just buying a knife, it's buying a peeler. And then you'll see within the patent literature, marvelous set of different embodiments. You'd see handles that are curved and handles that are straight, and you'd see people looking to optimize that design. So that kind of optimization occurs after any big breakthrough. It's optimization within that solution. But then you go into, I'm going to say it's the 1980s, 1990s, early 1990s. We saw two things occur. And one was the emergence of the ergonomic peeler. And there's this company, OXO, and their founder was someone who was into design. And it turned out the backstory is that his wife had arthritis and she had a hard time using a carrot peeler. And so what he realized is that he built a carrot peeler attached to a larger handle. And the first embodiment was just him cutting the handle off of a broomstick and attaching the peeler to it. And it was a bigger handle, and she was able to comfortably hold this. Now, you might ask, why didn't he peel carrots for his wife? That would have been maybe the honorable thing to do. But instead, he developed this wonderful business of ergonomic, design-intensive kitchen products. And it's a huge business today. And it's a huge industry because there are others that are competing in that industry. And so, that original inexpensive peeler is still out there. You can buy them on Amazon. I used to think they were 99 cents. I think they're a few dollars now. But most people will spend the $15 to buy the ergonomic peeler rather than the $5 to buy the cheap one. And so, that changed the basis of competition. And then roughly at that same time period, we saw the emergence of these baby carrots, these pre-peeled baby carrots that are in bags. And that was a marvelous innovation. A guy by the name, I think, of Steve Urasek came up with this, where he identified that there were a lot of pieces of carrots that came out of carrot production that would not normally sell as part of a bunch or bundle. And if you took those pieces and put them in kind of an automated, tumbler type situation of a facility, it would allow you to peel the outside of the carrots. And you would have what we now call baby carrots. They're not babies, but they're these pieces, these fragments, much more efficient, much more effective. It didn't mean that you or I had to ever touch a carrot until we were ready to eat it. And my understanding is that carrot consumption has actually gone up in the United States as a result of the availability of this. And so each time this occurred, there had been a change in the basis of competition. There's been a reordering of what companies win and what companies maybe not lose, but don't win. And so what my point is that companies should always be on the lookout for these opportunities. That opportunity may not be in your industry, at least not today. But you look not because you necessarily think it's going to be a good investment in the end that you'll get a huge return on, but you invest because it's an insurance policy to keep from missing it. And it's a financial option for future investment if you come up with the idea. So I look at this and I ask myself, why didn't the companies making box cutters pursue? Why didn't they even consider this? Because this was an opportunity that they all missed. And it took a guy with a startup and understanding those needs and pursuing that to come up with a better box cutter. It's the same thing with a carrot peeler. Why didn't the people making these cheap carrot peelers, why didn't they invest themselves? Again, not a big investment, but enough to discover and learn. And so that's this, if you will, the carrot peeler principle that it's changing. This happens. The time scale may be different. Today we're talking about AI. Well, we've had IT-based innovations in a very short time frame clip, time after time, for the last 50 years, actually last 70 years, since the invention of the transistor, 75 or more years. But other industries like box cutters, like carrot peelers, it may be a slower progression, but these are out there everywhere on a regular basis. And I think as business owners and either as an entrepreneur or in mature industries, the burden is on us to ask about those things, to look at those things.
In your career, you have mostly worked with mature enterprises. Number one, what was the main reason behind it? And only innovation can happen in mature industries. Like, this is a reality. Like, new startups, they cannot innovate anything.
I think there's opportunity everywhere, and it's incumbent on us to look for it. Now, you asked a wonderful question that I don't get asked often. Why do I work with mature companies and mature industries? And part of it is it's where I found myself in my career. And I'm going to be really clear. I've worked at, if you will, the cutting edge, bleeding edge of technology when I was a technologist. But over time, a lot of those companies ended up maturing. A lot of those industries matured. And so what I found in a very natural progression was that these mature industries were things that I was part of, was working with. And when I did the work on the research on this book on Serial Innovators, and as a quick aside, both of these were published by Stanford University Press, this in 2012 and this in 2022. The research that I did, it just happened to be in large mature companies. Now, who are these companies? And I say mature, I mean, it included people from companies like HP and Texas Instruments. So don't get me wrong. I mean, they're considered mature industries and mature companies compared to at the time maybe a Google or an Amazon. But they also included talking to people in companies like Caterpillar and John Deere, making agricultural equipment and earth moving equipment. People at General Motors and Ford. People at Procter and Gamble and Kimberly Clark. Personal product manufacturers. And so I ended up looking at people in these companies, and as I don't know if I'd share this with you, but I realized these serial innovators were the most important people you've never heard of. And I became fascinated by them. And so my attention was drawn to them. And I found that there's really a need, and it's a need that's not often addressed, because often the people in these companies feel some burden to be entrepreneurial and to be venture driven, which is all good. It can be good, but I think it misses the point, because the most successful stories that I've heard haven't always been from those kinds of organizational structures.
Okay, Bruce, we had a lot of things to cover, but unfortunately, we have a time limit. But before leaving, any message you want to give to all the people who are watching this? They have ideas in their mind, but unfortunately, they are not able to deliver those ideas or innovate something. Any message you want to give from your past experiences?
One of the first things I'd say is Well, first of all, I'll say that many of us don't spend enough time reflecting on things. And so, in fact, as a quick aside, I'd heard that 95% of executives believe they need to spend time on strategy, and 95% of executives in a different survey said they don't have time to spend on strategy. And I say that entrepreneurs, it's maybe a different set of things, but they're so busy trying to do something that they forget to ask this question. But I think it should be incumbent on every entrepreneur to ask themselves, do I want to be an entrepreneur, or do I want to do the work that it takes to succeed as an entrepreneur? And those can be very different things. And the kind of commitment necessary to be an entrepreneur on your own in a startup or with a small group in a startup, the kind of commitment to be an innovator within a large company to succeed, it takes a lot of work and a lot of personal investment. And I think it's incumbent on people to ask themselves, am I able and willing to do that? And only then proceed. And so my first advice is ask yourself, is this really what I want to do? And then the beauty of these things is, because innovation is a very human and personal act, just go out there and start to learn. The best innovators, the stories I hear countless times, and I'll just use consumer products because we interview people from several companies doing this. They would go out and they would watch people using products. They would buy products off the shelf that existed, and they would lock themselves in the bathroom and use them. They would apply hair coloring. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal a number of years back. This one guy worked in hair coloring at this one company, and he bought all these competitive products, and he was coloring his hair. He wanted to learn. He wanted to be intimate with the product, with the customers, and that's where you learn things. That's where you see patterns. It's just rolling up your sleeves and immersing yourselves. And that's the work that innovators do. It's not being an innovator, it's doing that. And until and unless you make those choices and deeply understand those things, not academically, but from a user's perspective, until you do that, it's very difficult to really expect that you have a chance to succeed.
Thank you so much, Bruce, for your precious time. And I hope all the viewers will going to love the podcast. If you love the podcast, do subscribe the channel and press the bell icon. We will be going to meet you in another exciting episode. Till then, keep daring, keep listening, and keep achieving your goals.